whether it's school or church or a task force meeting. All right, our next panel, an important panel specifically focused on the roadmap to resilience here in Southern California, with a feature on regional strategies and partnerships. We are excited to have Jeff Hayes moderating this panel. Many of us know Jeff. He is the Wildfire Risk Reduction Program Manager at the U.S. Forest Service in Southern California. And Jeff, special thanks for taking a leading role helping to plan this meeting. Over to you.
All right. Thank you, Secretary Crowfoot. And I want to start by acknowledging the people who made those films. Hopefully you enjoyed those. Veronica Verdeen and Yassi Wilkins were the two power movers behind those videos. Trying to capitalize on exactly what we heard this morning, the importance of trying to communicate this beyond just reports, right? Trying to make it real for people how we reduce wildfire risk across Southern California. All right, so this afternoon's first panel is going to be talking to you about what we heard this morning. Partnerships are so important. So the question is, with hundreds of partners across Southern California, how do we effectively make the work happen? And it's a really challenging question to answer. We've got an excellent panel for you today to answer that question and take some questions from the executive committee afterwards. But I thought it would be important to start with the lay of the land. The first place that I recommend you turn for your partnerships are the original stewards of this landscape. And you heard an encouragement to do just that from the Secretary this morning. So these are the native peoples of Southern California, and I'm happy to report that they are becoming more and more involved in our wildfire risk reduction efforts. We don't have a tribal member on this panel, but we do have a tribal member for you on the next panel to talk about the importance of this. But if you haven't been in conversation with your local tribes, please start those conversations now. You'll also see quite a smattering of other land ownerships on this map, and that sort of underlies the challenge of connecting with all of these land managers across Southern California. As you've already heard today, a game-changing aspect of the partnerships across Southern California is the Regional Forest and Fire Capacity Program of the Department of Conservation. That's the colors shown on this map. And what that really helps do is organize the partnerships at a sub-regional scale, a local level, so you know who you're able to work with in your immediate geography. So those are shown with the colors. They're overlain by the national forests in green. We have Regional Forest and Fire Capacity Manager here, Mike O'Connell from Irvine Ranch Conservancy, representing that program. We have Sal Reyes from the San Bernardino National Forest. You've already been introduced to it. It's on this map. And we have Lisa Worthington from Caltrans, and you're looking at the Caltrans districts on this map that you should be in touch with if you're looking to work with Caltrans across Southern California. You've got to be working with those districts. Similarly, if you're working with CAL FIRE, which you should be, or the contract counties across Southern California, you need to be in conversation with them. So you can see here we've got another arrangement of the CAL FIRE units in the contract counties. And I could show map after map after map. So Heather, I'm sorry, I don't have a map of the water managers of Southern California. We would run out of time if I kept showing you maps. So I'm going to stop with those, but just know that's the complexity of this landscape, is connecting with all the partners we have involved. Now, one thing that helps this is having unifying vision, and this is one glimpse of a unifying vision for Southern California. You've probably seen this before, and this is what our panel is going to talk about in order from the left, lower left of this image clockwise. So Mike's going to start us off by talking about community planning and preparedness. Lisa will then take it to ignition reduction. Then Heather will talk about montane forest conservation, and we'll end with Sal talking about our strategic fuel break network. I do want to acknowledge one important risk reduction effort that's not shown on this infographic, and that's the management of the gold-spotted oak borer pest. Hopefully people are aware of that pest that's been spreading and killing our native oak trees. It's critical to manage that pest for wildfire resilience and ecological resilience, and we have excellent partners working in that space. In particular, I would like to highlight Thierry Rivard from Tree People. If you haven't been working with him, they're leading a lot of our information management, especially around gold-spotted oak borer. And then I'm not sure if Jolene Tam is in the room from La Jolla Band of Luiseno Indians, but she's doing excellent work with the potential use of cultural fire to manage GSOB as a pest, and also working with CAL FIRE in LA County to try to proactively manage for that and other pests. So I just want to acknowledge, when anytime you put together an image like this, you're not going to be able to cover everything, much less for a panel, but we've got an excellent panel for you today. And for the 25 million people you've heard about in Southern California, if they can create this problem, 25 million people should be able to fix it. So how do they do that, Mike?
Was that my intro? All right, nice intro. Thank you, Jeff. My name is Mike O'Connell, and I'm the president of the Irvine Ranch Conservancy. We are not a state chartered conservancy. We're a 501c3. And I found out today that Inland Empire does not have a state charter conservancy, and we don't in Orange County either. Irvine Ranch Conservancy kind of plays the role of that. I want to start out by actually thanking the task force for your leadership, particularly Secretary Crowfoot and Director Wright. As I was saying to Patrick earlier, you're taking this so seriously and you're listening. And when Patrick said that when we came down and started talking in Southern California, we had an earful from people, I think a large percentage of that actually came from me. But it was all friendly. And the fact is, and we've been talking about it all day, fire is different. It's different from other disasters as well. A hurricane is the same whether it hits the panhandle of Florida or Miami, and earthquake is the same. But fire is different, as we're learning. Forest fire is different from shrubland fire. Inland shrubland fire is different from coastal shrubland fire. And that means we have different problems that we have to address, which is why this idea of regionalism is so important and working locally. What has emerged is kind of a nested set of collaborations where we have local sub-regional groups that are working. In Orange County, we have a group that's called COAST, and it is everyone who's affected by wildfire and responsible for it. So Caltrans is there, the local governments are there, the fire departments are there, the landowners are there, and we're working together on our specific problems. Then at the regional level, there are other organizations. Santa Monica Mountains Conservancy has their own collaboration. Inland Empire Community Foundation has their own as well, and Jeff's showing these areas. This is all, we call that the Southern California Wildfire Resilience Partnership. So that then rolls up in alignment with the task force and the work that's being done at the state level. So everyone is all aligned all the way up, but the work gets done on the ground. The whole thing for us is underpinned by the Regional Forest and Fire Capacity Program. And like Jeff said, it is a complete game changer. It allows us to develop the projects that are then available for funding. In Orange County, for example, when we're looking at community preparedness and readiness, where do we start? What do people understand about that? The RFFC program provided unique funding that allowed us to do a community survey to find out what people knew. And there were some pretty shocking answers that came out of that. If you're interested in this survey, I can share it with you. But the two that stood out for me were less than 20% of people in Orange County understood that embers pose the greatest risk from wildfire, less than 20%. And 2/3 of the people in Orange County thought that the fire department would save their home when a fire broke out. And this was consistent across the entire region. So we've worked through these partnerships to develop and identify priorities. We have a very strong set of actions that we've identified in Orange County, as have all the other sub-regional partnerships. Now what we need to do is connect it with funding at scale. And so we're excited that we're working through CAL FIRE's regional pilot program, which is using a block grant mechanism. By the way, the RFFC is also a block grant. And we're learning some important things in the regional pilot program. And that is that it is scalable. I have a lot of confidence that a mechanism like regional block grants for implementation can really increase the scale and the pace of how these projects are implemented. But we've also found that as much progress as we've made, we still have a long way to go to align the existing funding sources with what the needs are. For example, there's a huge bucket of funding called forest health. And you have to have a forest to use that funding. And we don't have forests other than the montane forests at the top of our hills in Orange County. We have shrublands. And so aligning that a little bit better with ecosystem health, for example, is a way that we can do that. This is not anyone's fault. I think it's just a natural progression of understanding now we've identified the problem, we're looking at the solutions, now we have to align the funding with those things. So I'll just conclude by, again, thanking the task force, and I want to introduce, speaking of heroes, the 82% of our ignitions in Orange County occur along primary roadways, 82%. And that means you can't turn to CAL FIRE and say, hey, solve that problem. This is a problem that we have to engage with the road managers, whether it's Public Works locally or Caltrans. And the just massive force behind that in Caltrans has been Lisa Worthington. So it's my honor to work with her and to introduce her to talk about how we're going to stop ignitions on roadways in Southern California.
Wow. What an amazing introduction. It's like such kind words. So the massive force is not just the power of one. Of course, you know that, right? The massive force is the power of the wave of all of you here. And putting the treatment in the right place requires analyzing the problem first. So my name is Lisa Worthington. I'm the chief of the Office of Natural Resource Management in Sacramento, and many of our vegetation management program staff, which are cross-disciplinary, are here or are listening. So I want to acknowledge all of them, plus all of our hundreds of field crews, tree programs, vegetation management crews, and contractors. So thank you for welcoming us to this panel. Next slide, please. Oh, I guess I have the... All right. You might have seen this image a little earlier in the morning presentation. This is a significant undertaking to develop and sign a charter. Jeff Hayes himself was the force behind the idea of a charter to establish a relationship to build a 10-year project portfolio for Southern California with the common strategic management objective of reducing ignitions. So shown in this video are our director, Patrick Wright, also Jason Kukin, the acting director of Region 5. We also have the Southern Region Chief, Mike Van Lobensells from CAL FIRE. We also have from the Department of Conservation and the RFFCP program, Shauna Alturas Bauer. And then finally, we have a representative of, I don't think you're in this photo, actually. You're not in this photo. But this signing of the charter happened yesterday, and it's very significant because it inks in writing our intention to continue to collaborate beyond our first phase. So thank you, Chief Tyler, for publishing the 2024 California Wildfire Activity Statistics. As I mentioned, we start with data and data analytics. You see a little lightning strike shown in red over the natural causes of wildfires, which is 3%. All the other causes that are on this slide, arson, debris, open burning, vehicles, equipment, misuse of fire by a minor, etc., recreation and ceremony, smoking, those are all human causes. So 97% we attribute to our role living and in the context of a natural landscape that we want to protect. Unintentionally, or in the case of arson, intentionally, we trigger wildfires and wildfire ignitions. So it's really good to look at the data before we move forward and say, where do we want to put the treatments in the right place? So this slide was funded in order to look specifically in the southern zone of southern forests. I just spoke of the 97% of ignitions statewide that are human-caused, but there also is a concentration within 500 feet of the road edge, which was quite interesting to discover that as we took a deeper dive. So roads are not only state highways, although I'm only representing the massive state highway system, which touches every single county. It's also city and county roads. It could also be unimproved forest roads. But 500 feet within a road edge is a significant concentration that appears to be reachable with and call out to Chief Berlant, an ember-resistant zone, sort of mega-sized, right? Mega-sized along roads. That ember resistance means we're doing a concentrated effort to reduce fuels, perhaps some hardening, maybe conversion of flashy, grassy non-natives to native species. That's what we're really talking about, up to 400 feet wide on road edges, both sides of road edges. That's a significant change. So as I mentioned, there's pilot projects. We have 3 state highways that function as primary evacuation routes for Southern California citizens, of which there's 25 million people. That's Interstate 15, Interstate 8, and State Route 74. So although the regional projects have regional representation in the charter that was signed, there's also sub-regional projects, and I do want to acknowledge they're shown here on this slide: the Irvine Ranch Conservancy, the Santa Monica Mountains Conservancy, the Inland Empire RCD, that have already invested monies, $2.7 million, in sub-regional projects. And of course, there's a lot more grantees that I have not acknowledged here, but those sub-regional projects are very critical and just as important as the regional projects, which will be about 760 plus acres of fuels reduction and native plant restoration in Riverside County, San Bernardino, San Diego, and Orange counties on those 3 state routes. So, you know, environmental laws somewhat complicate things, but in the case of the emergency proclamation that the governor signed that was mentioned earlier on March 1st, it really did open the door to streamlining. So in the case of working on projects within national forests, we're addressing NEPA. The emergency proclamation gave us relief from CEQA, but thankfully and thoughtfully, years ago, SB 901 was passed and then extended by AB 211, if you don't know that, which allows NEPA to equal CEQA, as I can simplify it. So we put all of our effort into hiring the best and brightest environmental consultants to help us that were very well versed in the state-issued environmental protection plan and the Cal VTP to use those best management practices in prescription writing for how do we need to build these very ember-resistant zones along these 3 state highways. Now we're going to kind of fly over these project areas so you can get a context of what we're really talking about. So you just saw Cajon Pass and the I-15. You can also see the engineering feat that it takes to build and design a highway. Also the bridge in San Bernardino County from the San Bernardino National Forest edge looking towards the San Gabriel Mountains. Flying south towards the population of San Bernardino. So this is 37 miles this project will be for one of the pilot projects to build a strategic fuel break. Second pilot project, flying over State Route 74. The CHP has given me permission to have the traffic speeds higher than the posted speed limit here, so that might give you a little giggle. The San Jacinto Mountains, of course, and the San Juan Loop. Trailhead is shown in these images. It's also known as the Ortega Highway. So the Ortega Highway bridges both Orange and Riverside County. Now we're flying towards the ocean. The Santa Ana Mountains will be one of the tours that will be held tomorrow in the San Bernardino National Forest, and it's about 16 miles of a fuel break there. And then the third pilot project will be on Interstate 8. So now we're in San Diego County, we're in the Cleveland National Forest, we're flying towards the ocean you can see the divided highway landscape here. It's 26 miles of this highway landscape that we will be creating the ember-resistant zone, looking towards Alpine. So a lot of similar landscape, if I may, in Southern California that's not forested. So we're dealing with flashy grassy fuels, we're dealing with brush and chaparral, and we will have some really great prescriptions that are shareable after the project's completed in about 3 years. So just a couple more slides, 2 more, I think. I did want to talk about something else that was written into the emergency proclamation, and that was an advantage when it comes to contracting. So there's a line in the emergency proclamation with regard to relief from the public contracting code. So what does that really mean? We negotiated through the hurdles of fair business practices and transparent business practices and realized that we don't have to accept the lowest bid for the work, that we can qualify a short list of contractors, many of which have worked with all of you, and you have recommended those contractors for this type of work to get the best value. So it's really comes down to hiring experienced, competent contractors to result in faster risk reduction. So I don't know if anybody else is taking advantage of that additional relief in the emergency proclamation, but we certainly decided to here. And Wade, you'll be happy to know that when Caltrans does upload our entire project portfolio into the emergency proclamation portal, we'll be doubling the amount of acres that are currently in the portal right now. So before I pass the presentation over to Heather Dyer from the San Bernardino Valley Municipal Water District, I would like to say that there is a continuous funding need to build out this project portfolio beyond this first window of pilot projects, and that's about $50 million. We think that's a very good and conservative estimate for our portfolio over the next 10 years. Really what we're looking for is to capture regional knowledge and figure out the geographic best fit for more strategic fuel breaks. Yes, along road corridors, but perhaps also, as you saw from the morning presentations, that there could be other locations in the landscape that are perfectly suited, and we need that intel in order to put those project ideas into the planning phase. Also, cross-jurisdictional wildfire modeling will be discussed in greater detail in the next panel presentation, so I'm really excited to watch that myself. And then I'd like to introduce Heather now.
Thank you. I'm so happy to be here, and I'm so excited to see so many interested faces. I've been working in the watershed for about 15 years. I started out as a fish biologist for U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and a Section 7 regulator. Then I moved over to the Cleveland National Forest as their fish biologist and finally came to work for the Water District about 10.5 years ago. Miraculously, it seems, I did become the first endangered species biologist to ever become a general manager of a California water agency. So if you think to yourself, wow, she sounds a lot different than most of the other California water agency general managers, that's why. I come to it with a very different perspective. I'm here to talk about today the Southern Montane Forest Strategy in the San Bernardino Mountains and how important that is to our local water supply. And as Secretary Crowfoot said earlier, there should be more water agencies at this table in California, but especially in Southern California, because we are so reliant upon the headwaters of our national forests, of these mountain ranges, for local water supply. As you know, imported water from either the Colorado River or Northern California is not reliable. It is variable, there's a lot of climate risks, there's a lot of other types of risks, and so we need to be really working towards a reliable local water supply. And I would say one of the greatest risks that we could possibly manage for is fire. I can't make it rain, but I could hopefully make less of a risk of a catastrophic wildfire that will impact our water supply in some way. And so that's really what we're working towards here. It's interesting because most people don't think about water agencies as caring about the headwaters. In fact, one time I was at an Association of California Water Agencies meeting, and they were talking about the headwaters only being the Sierra Nevada. And I was like, wait, what? Cleveland National Forest, Angeles National Forest, San Bernardino National Forest. For us, those are all the headwaters. And so it's local headwaters plus statewide headwaters that we need to be worrying about. So what am I thinking about? 67% of my local water supply, meaning the rain and the snow that falls on the San Bernardino National Forest and flows down the Santa Ana River and its tributaries, 67% of my water supply is dependent on that system being functional. If I don't have imported water, I'm relying on local water. And so if it's been impacted by a burn, I'm in big trouble. So I'm building out infrastructure, water distribution, water capture, groundwater recharge, and aquifer replenishment systems, hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars worth of infrastructure that is located just below national forests that maybe have had, lacking or slow to progress fuels management activities on it. And so about 10 years I started thinking about this and working with the amazing board that I have and also a lot of local partners. I remember we actually asked, not this forest management, I want to make that clear, but I asked former forest management, what does a healthy, resilient San Bernardino National Forest look like? They said to me, we don't know, we've never let ourselves dream that big. So that was my big clue that we need to work on a strategy, and it cannot just be us, and it cannot be the Forest Service, and it can't just be, whoever is immediately impacted. We need everyone around the table to preserve these very, very important natural resources, ecological services of the National Forest and all of our headwaters. So here's a map of our montane forest in green. We have about 1 million acres within what we call the Headwaters Resiliency Partnership boundary area. That's in black. You can see the yellow, the red, and the orange is the areas that have burned in the last 25 years. It's about 609,000 acres. So 60% of our headwaters area has burned. Some of those have been catastrophic in terms of damage to the ecosystem, damage to the soil, impacts to clean water flowing down the mountains, loss of major ecosystem benefits. And so it's a huge challenge for all of us to figure out how can we minimize this impact in the future, and who is it going to take to have around the table to figure out what is the strategy, what plan are we going to put in place, and who is going to actually implement these things. And I love what Dee Dee said earlier, and I'm going to use it right now and probably later. All lands, all hands. We should have that as a tagline. Montane forests are not less valuable than the sequoias or the huge redwoods that we think about in Northern California. They're just as important ecologically and as an ecosystem services component of the world that we live in as all of those huge, redwood forests and the other type of what I'll call more charismatic ecological systems. So we have to pay attention to these forests and these different types of systems that are so important to different parts of California. So what I'm really talking about here is layers of partnership. And Lisa talked about one type of partnership in certain parts. I'm talking about even maybe a little bit more granular that we're working on in the Inland Empire for this Headwaters Resiliency Partnership. And it's really several steps. So first, we just need that strategy. Again, not knowing what a healthy, resilient forest looks like in 25 years is not an acceptable answer, to me at least. I think that we should all be working on what is the goal? The goal's big. The goal is audacious. The goal is hard. So let's start working and let's stop telling ourselves that it can't be done. So that's what the first step is, strategy development. Then building out the support network that we need, and that's planning efforts, that's permitting efforts, that's funding efforts, that's the outreach that Dee Dee talked about earlier about the communities that people live in. Then trying to figure out, this is gonna cost a lot of money, but the cost of doing nothing is many, many magnitudes of times greater. So figuring out a way, how do we pay for fuels management, restoration activities, protection of these ecosystems now so that we're not paying to restore it in the future? And just to put a little bit of context from a water agency perspective, why do I care? Why am I willing to spend money on the national forest that's not my land, it's not within my jurisdiction? For instance, post-line fire, we had $150,000 worth of cleanup work for a 40-second rain event that occurred after the line fire. That's digging out mud and debris, that's finding a place to put it. 40 seconds cost us $150,000. To me, I'd rather put $150,000 on the landscape and do some fuels management to make prevention a bigger part of our strategy. So what does this look like? We got the Forest Service. We have the Southern California Mountains Foundation and the amazing work of the Urban Conservation Corps. We, as the lone water agency for right now, but hopefully that's going to change, we partnered with IERCD, with Blue Forest Conservation, Cal State San Bernardino. We've started the first of its kind. It's called the Mountains Lab, and it's really all about the science, water quality monitoring science, LiDAR flight, aerial photography, repeat photography, gathering all that information in a way that we can use our knowledge to make greater impact on the land. So these are all the partners that we have as we're building out this framework that will work at implementation, monitoring, and adaptive management for many, many decades to come. So there's always more work to do. We can't stop, we can't give up, we can't say we don't have the money, so let's figure out how we move forward. Looking for long-term funding agreements. We're looking at what to do with the woody debris that we take off of the forest. We're looking for workforce development. As you know, we've got to get our workforce prepared to do this work, and of course, permit streamlining, which we always appreciate. But this is just some of the things that we have to do, and I argue that we need to do it collaboratively and as a true integrated system. They have incident command post fires. Maybe we need an incident command type structure pre-fire. Let's prevent those fires by working together instead of just afterwards when we have to clean up. So finally, I want to just leave you with an announcement. On behalf of the Inland Empire Headwaters Resiliency Partnership, I would like to announce that the partnership has completed and executed our very first charter, which is a first of its kind in Southern California for our area. I want to give a big shout out to Eugenie Bostrom, who was our facilitator and the lead author, and all of the partners. Hopefully I named most of you in my presentation, but all the different partners and participants that were part of this process, the ad hoc committee to develop this charter. And it's a huge milestone. We've never done anything like it before. And so I want to especially give a shout out to my board of directors who, again, as a water agency, it's really hard to figure out how do you tell people you're spending this money on a national forest that you don't own or manage. But it was through the courageous leadership of my board, and especially one of my directors, Susan Longville, who's been a champion of this for over 5 years. So thank you so much for all of the support of the partnership and the state.
Good afternoon, everybody. Sal Reyes, the fire chief for the San Bernardino National Forest. So as my boss, Supervisor Harrison, was up here on one of the previous panels, and Chief Shane Littlefield was here, I have an enviable task of talking about some of our successes and what we do here on the San Bernardino National Forest, not just that forest, but collectively and holistically in the Inland Empire and really, truly Southern California. So some hard acts to follow, but in the sense and true nature of what this panel is geared up for, I just wanted to go over a couple different things and not to repeat everything from the initial panel, but I have the advantage right now of talking from a fire chief perspective and say some things that I think we all already know, but really be able to underscore that and focus in on the advantages of when we have a fuel break, whether it's, and this is, I think, some of the challenges that we face with internally when we go against some of the organizations and or individual people in their communities that don't understand what a fuel break is and think it's grandma and grandpa's dozer line from 500 years ago that was just, scrape the entire ridgetop away and we're done. And that is not the case anymore, depending on the location. This, again, is an example of the line fire and our Angeles Oaks field break. But in reality, this could be any field break USA, but with specificity here in Southern California. And we all know, it's already been said, that there are some very specific challenges in Southern California. When we talk about the montane forest, when we talk about the chaparral that we deal with here, that really isn't like any other fuel type anywhere else. It was already mentioned, I can't remember by who, I apologize, but we deal with fire in a different way here. The first 48 hours of a fire in Southern California are different than almost any other fire, and even in our, for our brothers and sisters up north in Northern California. They are some of the most critical initial attack phases that we've ever seen, and we've all seen examples of that here in California. Not to say that that doesn't happen in other parts of the states and across the country as well, right? But the winds that we face, the fuel type and conditions that we face are like nowhere else in the world. And also that WUI interface that we have to deal with, really these field breaks come into play like no other. And speaking from that fire chief perspective again, we all know, but I think this is a good demonstration. On the right, you see the footprint of the El Dorado fire, which was already mentioned in 2020. And then on the left, on the upper hand section, it's the line fire of just last year. So fuel breaks aren't meant to normally stop a fire in its tracks. It's already been beat down what we know about what a fuel break is, but I think in this case it's fairly obvious that they were effective in doing what they were doing and giving our firefighters, our personnel. It was mentioned before. I appreciate hearing it from our regional boss over there, Jason Kiken. The firefighters, the men and women, and everything in between. Not just the firefighters, but the support staff. Your sons, your daughters, your husbands, your wives. Some of you yourselves going out there and doing the work. Would you rather send, your all those people that are near and dear to us and doing the mission and the job that we ask them to, when there is something like that that's in place, when they're going into looking something like that, right? I think we all know the answer. The partnerships that we have here locally in Southern California, and I really am going to say Southern California. I know we have the opportunity to leverage and focus and highlight all the efforts of the Inland Empire, which really are a great success. But truly in Southern California, we saw all those different maps up earlier, correct? If you look at it, you can draw, highlight 3, 4, 5 counties, and essentially you have the entire southern portion of the state. That really doesn't exist anywhere else. So that connection and that cooperation, that collaboration has been a really big success. And I think what we need to continue to focus on is the consolidation of some of those individual partnerships that have already been in place. It's been mentioned, HRP, and that collaboration of multiple agencies that have already been working together, but now we're working even more hand in hand. In the LA area, and the Rivers and Mountains Conservancy is working really hard to bridge the gap across up to 13 different areas as of right now, municipalities, and we don't even need to mention again, right, what that would potentially look like for the effectiveness when we just are getting out of the, Chief Littlefield mentioned it, here in Southern California, the bridge, the airport, the line fire, top of the news during the summer. All of a sudden, Christmas comes around, and what happens? The fires of LA take the limelight, rightfully so, and there's no other talk other than that. I would also like to congratulate everybody in this collective effort. When you really think about it, when we say that there's really a fire year now, when do we have time to do the fuels treatments that we're actually looking to do on our forest and many of the units around? We really had about 2 months to do effective fuel treatments when we start talking about prescribed fire, which is one of the most important elements that we have available to us for a lot of different reasons, with conditions that weren't extreme. I wasn't going to tell my boss or anybody else that I'm going to go do a prescribed fire when the Eden fire is happening, right? That just doesn't make sense. And then guess what happens come May and just after that, right? I and my other partners in the fire agencies are gearing up for actual fire season. So in reality, you know, it was a very short window to work through, and I think we need to remind ourselves about that and everybody else as we're going through the other things. In the end, the effectiveness of fuel breaks, I think, are obvious, and we need to be able to maintain that. In the Forest Service, in the federal world, we call it conservation finance. It's already been mentioned a number of different ways and for a number of different reasons, and that is going to be critical. We have right now over 77,000 acres of current fuel breaks, either in place and or planned, and it's, you know, not pandering, but we just need to know that we need to find ways to work together collectively, holistically, to secure the proper amount of funding. And just for those alone, we're probably looking at $50 to $60 million on an annual basis, let alone for the stuff that we want to do, for the stuff that we have planned out. And able to do that, that's going to allow us to do that adaptive and active forest management that we can call, you know, from our own agency and or vegetation management. I'll end with this, and you can see that picture on there. You know, that's really the take home. What are we doing, and what are we sending our first responders, and what are we doing preemptively to spend $1 to save an immeasurable amount of dollars on the restoration side, and whether that's reforestation, any other type of restoration, ecological, biological, industrial, but when it really comes down to it and we're looking at the places that we do and go and send our workforce and concentrate our efforts, imagine when we have to start using terms like community restoration, because we already are, right? So it's not just replacing the biological diversity and the excellence that we have here in Southern California, but really protecting our communities, protecting our people, our personnel, and everything else. And the efforts that this group and this task force are doing right now, I think, are critical to that. And some of the successes that we have here in Southern California, I think, are excellent examples of how we can just continue to be better at that. Thank you.
Well, thank you, panelists, for completing the holistic cycle of risk reduction in Southern California. I'm definitely interested in hearing what the executive committee has to ask of the panelists based on those presentations.
Yeah, thanks. I'll be glad to start off questions. Maybe for Michael, a question, and then for Lisa, and I'll ask both, and you can answer them. So one key takeaway is, you know, human-caused ignitions are the vast majority of our challenge down here. And if we had a magic wand, we'd eliminate those. One clear solution is to ensure that when they occur along our roadways, that they don't turn into big fire, which is huge to have Caltrans and others play a role. What role does behavior modification play in public awareness? I'm interested to know, like, do we think we can move the needle on reducing the causes of the ignition?
So you bring up a really interesting point, which is that there are so many different kinds of ignitions that stopping them at the source is probably close to futile. You could have a campaign to stop people from throwing cigarette butts out the window. And the chart that Lisa showed is smoking is 3% of the ignitions. And you could have a campaign to stop people from pulling their cars off on the side of the road. That's another single source. So I actually think we're approaching it strategically from exactly the right position, which is to create that envelope of a roadway that whatever the source of ignition is, it doesn't get off into the wildlands. That's a better investment of effort, and it doesn't require people massively changing their behavior. I think there needs to be a lot of education, but you're not trying to eliminate those things, because I don't know that we can eliminate them.
That's really helpful to understand. And then Lisa, on the Caltrans side, so important the work that Caltrans is doing that you're driving. What's the prospect for this becoming sort of a statewide policy for Caltrans? I mean, ignition reductions are particularly acute down here, but they're a big deal really wherever. Do you see this, do you see a future in which this becomes sort of standard operating procedure regardless of the Caltrans district? And specifically, what are the barriers that would need to be removed to enable that?
So I do represent Sacramento, not just Southern California, so it therefore is a statewide strategic management objective. So we hope to carry that into the other 3 regions and engage with those regional partners. But I think the bigger picture is, how do we want to manage our roadsides that are in a natural condition, right? There's going to be very different prescriptions whether we're looking at the Chaparral landscape or the Humboldt Redwoods or the coastal zone or the inland areas. So it's very different prescriptions. And I think what we need is we need a collective book of prescriptions that will stand up to peer review, that are appropriate for roads. So they can be applied to cities and counties and federal roads and not just state highways. Because it's not unique to state highways, but state highways can get it started. And then maintaining those strategic fuel breaks and vegetation management strategies is what we need to commit to as well. So that book of prescriptions concept, I think that's what we would love to explore. What is appropriate and transferable to a city capital improvement plan or a county that can be vetted by the county board of supervisors in the rural counties, or definitely amongst all the fire and forestry practitioners here. Is that prescription going to work? Is it sustainable for 5 years? When do we have to do a re-entry to maintain that new baseline condition? Those are the real big challenges.
So helpful, and I think about, we have utility partners in the room, and the work that utilities are doing is helping at scale. And I think about, our road network as another set of solution providers at scale. If I had a magic wand, we could treat these roadside treatments like highway maintenance and somehow fund them out of transportation budgets, given that Natural Resource Agency budgets are limited. Is that at all possible? Do you see?
You're gonna be happy with this. We're 100% funded out of the state highway account right now. I have never applied for any grants from CCI. I didn't want to compete with all the need out there. So working internally and convincing the executive board and the Caltrans policy managers that we needed to divert monies from pavement and bridge projects to managing our lands, our public lands along state highways, happened 9 years ago. So, and then 5 years ago, all the money started to flow in from the state highway account. Would it be nice to be able to leverage that money with monies from the California Natural Resources Agency? Definitely, yes. So you'll be happy to know we're 0% dependent.
All right, that deserves applause. And just huge thanks. I mean, it's so encouraging to be working with you and Caltrans in this way. It's so critical. I want to open it up to questions of other executive committee members. Sure. Patrick.
So building on that, we've talked all morning about putting together pipelines of projects. We've talked about block grants. We've talked about the Montaigne strategy, the ignition strategy, 6 subregions using RFFC grants. How close are we to having 6 plus maybe the Montaigne and ignition reduction, 6 pipelines that actually have the listed projects in a dollar amount? So we can go to finance, the legislature, Congress, and say, okay, you asked for pipelines of projects, you asked for block grants, here they are. I mean, I imagine the answer is uneven, not every part of Southern California is the same, but how close are we to that vision?
Patrick, I think we're there, honestly.
Yeah,
We've got the list of projects for all of these cornerstones across Southern California.
Yep.
Do we have them in total of all the potential money we could spend? No. But do we know where we could start for all of these? Yes, we've got those lists.
Okay. We also have a set of timing where we have projects that are ready to go now. And by the time those are done, we're ready to go the next time. In Orange County, we have all of our projects identified in the CWPP, and we have tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, and we're ready to go.
We need to find a way. We've talked forever about adding planned projects to our dashboard. We need to figure out a way to capture that so that we can tell the story to folks in Sacramento and Washington so they can better understand what the need is. As you know, everybody's sort of dealing with round numbers when they're talking about cap and trade money or they're talking about, Prop 4 money. It'd be really useful to have better estimates on what the actual need is and what's ready and what's not. So let's work on that.
Absolutely.
Well, so earlier we heard that California is the fourth largest economy, right? Some of those ingredients that go into that are good roads, being able to move commerce around, water supply, electricity, and yet there's that connection from the map of fire starts from each of those. And so what you're doing is very compelling. You're looking at where the problem's coming from and trying to solve it from there. And so my question is throughout all of that, is there any avoided cost study? You know, so you're trying to identify this issue and get to a solution, and it's trying to avoid some other cost that presumably could be less, right?
I think the whole afternoon panel is going to be talking about that.
Perfect.
You're going to get more than you want in your answer.
Careful what you ask for. I guess,
No, it's really fantastic.
I would just add that some of the other water agencies in Northern California, Yuba especially, Placer, they have been working on water-specific avoided costs and trying to calculate that out, you know, by acre foot of water that they don't have to supply some other way, which is very compelling. I would say that if we're going to do that sort of study, and maybe they'll talk about it later, is what we're seeing here in Southern California is not only the avoided costs of impacts to our infrastructure, but also in this particular region adjacent to the San Bernardino National Forest and probably Angeles, it's getting to the point where we're having house sales fall through because someone can't get fire insurance. It's really impacting our local economy in a way that I think we need to think bigger in trying to understand what are we going to spend to avoid those impacts versus what is the total economic impact of not getting control of this issue.
Well, so to that very point, earlier today, I get this this text message from my mortgage company. Your insurance is confirmed as renewed and paid. And I'm thinking, okay, you know, should I be celebrating that? Yes. Which is an awkward thing, right? But that's a very real statement for so many people. And so all of this work, not just what you're talking about, but in total for this whole thing, goes to trying to celebrate that for more. Anyway.
I was just going to say, part of the framing of this is we haven't thought about it as a collective issue to fund. We've thought about it as the fire problem. Fire is just the trigger that causes this massive economic ripple. We had in 2020 in Orange County, the Santa Ana school system was shut down for 3 days. Parents had to find daycare. They couldn't go to work because they were taking care of their kids. And you know, that happens all the time. So if we think of it too narrowly as we need to fund wildfire solutions, we're missing the justification for why we're doing that. It's really at the scale of the fourth largest economy being impacted by that.
And I'll just add, you know, time is money. And that was the beauty of the emergency proclamation. So avoided costs of that extra time is something that is a very real thing for those of us that are looking at budgets and saying, how can we do more with the money that we have instead of asking just for more money? How can we? So, you know, I have this 180-page solicitation document, which was the standard way of applying as a contractor to do work on the state highway system that's now condensed to 6 pages, again, because of the public contracting code relief. So time is money too, so avoided costs. There's a lot of parallel avoided costs that maybe we can articulate. But I concur with everything that was stated here. And there'll be a very robust presentation after this one about the additional analysis on avoided costs. So stay tuned.
Yeah, thank you. This was a great panel. Michael, I would love to get a copy of that survey about, I think, understanding what residents know and didn't know in that moment would be great, and to be able to replicate that in other places too. And then for the panel in general, this is a topic about partnerships and understanding that stakeholders aren't just, Heather, as you pointed out, land managers or landowners, and how you mentioned school systems. How do we invite in people, or maybe you could talk about how you've seen people who haven't been those traditional stakeholders get invited into the process to build toward a collaborative vision and strategy.
So anyone who knows me knows I have a big tent approach. I don't see jurisdictional boundaries very well, and we've applied that to our Headwaters Resiliency Partnership. And the way we did it is we just start having one person talk to another person who talks to another person, and it's like neighborhoods that are participating in our meetings. I think at one point we had 80 different people on a Zoom call to talk about the vision and the strategy, and some were residents of the mountain communities. It really helps. San Bernardino Valley, we supply a coordinator for this effort. It's one of our staff members who's, an excellent planner. He's out there somewhere, Chris Jones. Really very experienced, excellent coordinator of environmental projects, but also he lives in Running Springs. He lives in the community. And so he was able to reach out, through school and probably after school sports of his kid or, whatever it might be. And it's about the connection. So I think that we get wrapped up in what uniform you wear or what badge you wear or, who funds you or whatever. But it's really about everyone coming to the table with their authentic needs and the things that they can offer to the greater solution, and by doing that and having as big of a tent as possible, then that's when the magic really starts to happen. And what I loved about the panel earlier is, we had the Forest Service, we also had Dania from NFF, and it's like she does something very particular and she does it so well. And so it's like, Dania, you do that. And Forest Service, the path through this particular thing, so you do that. And we have really great environmental regulators who can help, guide the process. So it's almost like you're just like, you have this recipe of who's best at what of this formula, and let's put them on that, and we come together and we all put our best effort forward, and the bigger the tent, the better, because that's more knowledge and more understanding that you're bringing to the solution.
We've actually had a slightly different approach to it in Orange County, where if everyone that is affected by the wildfire issue were in the room, it would be everyone. And it becomes an unwieldy process of simple problem solving at that point. And so our fire chief convened this working group, and where I think he drew the line was everyone who has a piece of responsibility for solving the problem is there at the table. So it's the landowners, the fire departments, the land managers, the regulatory agencies, and they're the core of the group, and then they coordinate outside of that, so that the process is about problem solving, and it doesn't get to be just a everybody lobbying in everything that they've got. It's worked pretty well. People can feel left out because they just want to participate. That just tells you need to communicate better with them. So we've had a lot of success by having the people who really own a piece of the problem being at the table.
And then I'll just add to close that question out. I'm a big believer in the CWPP process, the Community Wildfire Protection Plan process, because that's the opportunity for community to come together and to identify their priorities and their solutions and their needs and publish it, and it's credible and it's cross-jurisdictional. So for Caltrans to look to and validate a CWPP, we're doing something right. In addition to other agencies that might publish their own plans, like the CAL FIRE units that publish their annual fire plans, or the forest management plans or whatnot, or Coast and the plans that they produce. So I think it's already there. We just have to rely on that and give the CWPP process a chance to mature and get updated if it hasn't been updated in a while. But definitely across Caltrans, we're looking to those CWPPs as valid, credible input that's already in writing. We just have to take the time to really digest it and understand it and apply it.
Yeah, and I'll share a thought. I think most every Californian understands the problem statement of wildfire. We've been living it. It's become very existential. Far less Californians understand the solution set. And I think at worst, they think it's a problem that their, CAL FIRE or their fire departments are going to solve or not solve. Michael, I think your approach in Orange County makes sense around bringing the ones responsible in the room as sort of the first concentric circle. But I also appreciate the community planning process, because as we learned in Marin in April, really interesting model up there, we know that if we're going to affect insurance rates for homes, it's not only the things that we're doing on the landscapes outside of the communities, it's the stuff inside of the communities. And it seems like Palisades and Eaton really drove that home. Those were urban conflagrations. Those were wildland fires that once they hit those communities, destroyed, a large portion of those communities. So I think it's a both and. It's, getting better and flooding the zone in partnerships and resources, getting the work done faster on the landscapes, and then moving into the communities. I think about, the work that we're doing on Zone Zero, our Office of the State Fire Marshal, our new Board of Forestry Director, Tony, is here. That's really important too. And how are we going to harden our communities? And more people and more sectors need to see themselves as part of the solution. Landscape architects, for example, are part of the solution. School districts, part of the solution. So, not for a conversation here, but I'm really glad that the task force, which really started out with more of a landscape focus, is increasingly, building on within these communities around community hardening, because it will take both to truly reduce risk. Other questions, Supervisor?
Yeah, thank you. Just a couple questions actually. So for Heather, I might have missed it, but when you're having conversations with your board about making investments into the forest, are you talking to them about increased water storage as far as your snowpack? And if you are, how important is that in justifying those expenses? And if you could speak to that. And then for Michael, I'm curious to know, you mentioned you're a 501c3, so I'm curious about your funding. I'm sure you get a lot of grants, but do you have like a philanthropic arm? And if so, how important is that to your activities? And do you have any advice for the folks in the room about how they might be able to expand upon what they're currently doing?
So where I'm going with my board, and we signed the charter on Tuesday, so that was pretty momentous, is for us it's really about the local supply that comes down the river and post-fire debris flows. So if there is a debris flow after a fire, we will not be able to use that water either for delivery to agriculture or cities or even recharge basins in some circumstances. So that means we could have something of 80,000 acre feet, which is roughly 300,000 households or so worth of water, that wouldn't have that water supply for maybe even years until the ecosystem recovers. So what is the value of the water that I now have to go out and replace on the open water market or from some other source that we have? And so that's how I've been talking with my board about it, is it's like, what is the replacement cost of that water if we lose the supply due to fire and debris flow? And I think there was an agency in Colorado, they weren't able to use their reservoir for 5 years after a fire and a debris flow. So it's a significant cost. Like I said, $150,000 to clean out debris from a 40-second event, multiply that on a landscape scale, it's really, really expensive. So we're in the process of doing that math right now, and I know Blue Forest Conservation's working on that math as well to try to justify our proactive investment on National Forest fuels management and restoration projects.
I'll just pile on, and I remember, and this may be Denver Water in Colorado, has spent tens of millions of dollars on managing its upper watersheds because of the specific impacts. And I've never understood why more agencies don't look around the corner on that. I do think we have our leaders in California, but I'm really hoping that there can be progress on quantifying those avoided impacts on water supply and water quality. Because even if you had, a critical mass of water agencies in California spending a small portion of their infrastructure budget on just contributing to the solution, that'd be meaningful to creating ongoing durable funding streams.
I'll also just add one more thing. So a lot of water agencies do hydropower, and we're just now getting into the hydropower up in the mountains. And so we're in the process of buying seven hydropower facilities from Southern California Edison. So that's another point of context for my board to think about. We're going into hydropower. We need those hydropower facilities to not burn down. They are very expensive and hard to replace. So we need to proactively protect that investment. And hydropower and green energy is critical to our local grid. It's critical to the state of California. And so not protecting those assets would be a tremendous loss in terms of time and value of hydropower in conjunction with water supply.
So we are actually a land conservation organization. We steward about 32,000 acres of these lands. And as a mission-oriented organization, we get to the table because too frequent wildfire is essentially destroying what we care about. We also live in those communities, so that's important to us as well. But most of our funding actually comes from land management services for public landowners. We have an advantage as a nonprofit in that we have the added dimension of being able to raise extra money to do that. And we've done that largely in response to wildfires rather than in prevention. The big change was RFFC for us. We're the grant recipient for RFFC, and then we've been able to turn around and use that money in leveraged ways to advance risk reduction in Orange County. So I think there are some advantages to us being a 501c3 and some disadvantages. Rory from Santa Monica Mountains Conservancy and I are always talking about how she's got an advantage because she's a state chartered conservancy, so she gets money in the state budget and we can't. But we go out and raise philanthropic dollars, and that's a little different. So it's an advantage and a disadvantage for us.
One more. So for Jeff, you said you guys are ready as far as what it costs. And so I'm curious to know, when you say you're ready, does that include breaking down your costs to planning and implementation? And then are you also, when you say you're ready, do you have the benefits of those projects? We've talked a little bit about that earlier today. So really what I'm getting at is return on investment, right? And being able to articulate that to those that are the decision makers, right? So is that part of where you guys are when you say you're ready?
That's exactly what I meant. You're asking the right question, that we are now ready, and you're going to hear about it on the next panel, but we do have the cost for planning, for implementation, for all these projects, the regional priority plans of the RFFC groups, the 5-year plans of the Forest Service, the blending of those plans. We know what it will cost to get this work done. And you're about to hear about the avoided costs and the fire modeling. One thing that hasn't come up, we talked a little bit about acre feet of water, which is pretty easy to measure by comparison with avoided risk of an avoided fire. So that's what you're going to be hearing about next on the next panel, because that's really been the game changer for conservation finance for Southern California, is that we haven't been able to come to anybody other than water managers for forested areas to say, here's what you get for your investment. And now that changes.
Phenomenal.
And we haven't even talked about the avoided public health impacts of smoke. I just talked to a colleague today who's in the Eastern Sierra and June Lake, where the air quality index is 200 today as a result of wildfire smoke. And a lot of us, have been raising kids in certain years where they can't play outside for a period of time. So anyways, I'm hoping we can delve into that topic in our next session as well. I'm going to turn it to you, Jeff, to take us home and conclude the session.
Well, I think it should be clear to everyone that we are heavily partnered in Southern California, and there is so much more we can do to partner. And one thing we didn't talk a lot about was focusing on the partnerships, focusing on the relationship building. So please take advantage of this meeting, take advantage of these panelists off the stage, have the conversations today that advance your partnerships and build it into this Southern California-wide wildfire risk reduction effort.
Excellent, thank you. Please join me in thanking the panel for that great conversation. Okay, I'm going to share our roadmap for the rest of the day. We are going to, in a moment, take a short break. We're going to come back and have this much anticipated panel that has been referenced here. and then we're going to wrap it up with closing remarks, and then later move to a reception on campus here. So let's return by just before 3 o'clock, and we'll start promptly at 3. Thank you.